Peter, that sounded a heck of a lot more like a stump speech, I got to say, than just about touting the August numbers, which is expected considering we are heading into an election year. He talked more about Donald Trump than we have heard him talk about in previous times in which he's addressed the jobs numbers, but also kind of gave more of a 30,000 foot above view of the economy versus specifically addressing the numbers that just came out earlier today.
Yeah, Yasmin, I think you're exactly right. That was my impression as well. This was as much, if not more, candidate Biden than President Biden there. You know, he was a little bit behind schedule. It seemed as if, as he often is, he was engaged in his remarks, and it was perhaps not any mistake that at the end of his first set of words, even the end of his first sentence, I think he made the point that the former president left office with fewer jobs than when he came to office. The president recognizes the first jobs report since the Republican campaign has heated up after their first debate took place, where Joe Biden's name, more than Donald Trump, was on the top of the tongue as so many of those candidates really trying to criticize his handling of the economy. And I think he really wanted to do his best here to push back on that, recognizing that not all Americans are feeling these gains right now, that the numbers, the data has shown. I've been struck by my conversations privately with White House aides, allies of the president, who acknowledged that there is a lag in the time between when Americans start to feel this movement and way the numbers may demonstrate that it's taking place here. But the president really made the case for what he has accomplished so far. There was no imminent sign of any recession that so many Americans had feared. And the president is trying to really just cast the country as being in a good place going into this holiday weekend and looking ahead of the year.
Yeah, Kitty, I mean, Peter's exactly right. There were predictions that were being made just a couple of months ago that we could have been headed towards a recession right about now, possibly October, November, fall of 2023. It looks as if, because of these numbers and what they're saying to us, that that's not happening. It may be because of the efforts of the Biden administration, because of the efforts of the Fed chair as well, and these interest rate hikes. But when you're looking at the polling numbers, the latest poll out of Reuters, 60% of Americans disapproving of the Biden administration's handling of this economy, right? What does he say when he gets out there to move that number?
Well, first, I want to focus on, again, these numbers are really good. And I think that this jobs report really shows that we never had to choose between falling inflation and an economy that really delivers for workers and families if we invest in people. And I do think that that is what the Inflation Reduction Act and other key policy initiatives coming out of the Biden administration have done. I think that's a really important message for the Fed to get as well. We've now had a record spell of low unemployment at the same time as falling inflation. So the people who thought that we needed to throw millions of people out of work to get inflation under control were just wrong. But I do think it's important to remember that wages are only now ticking up and beginning to grow at a faster clip than inflation. And that's partly because workers are banding together across the country to organize and demand better from employers. Those wages are bringing more people off the sidelines and into the labor force, but it's going to take time. Inflation has come down, but prices are still high and people are still struggling to afford housing, childcare, higher education, the things that they really need to feel economically secure. And so we need to focus on how policymakers like those at the Fed and folks in Congress can continue to invest in people and keep this job market growing at the rate it's growing now.
So all that in mind, Brian Cheung, what are we expecting come September, I believe, right, when we're going to hear next from Jerome Powell? Are we looking at another Fed rate hike here, considering the numbers seeming as if it looks like these Fed rate hikes are working? Right? What's going to happen next?
Yeah, well, analysts that I've heard from, even in reaction to this morning's jobs reports, has said that the numbers reinforce that the Fed is likely to not raise interest rates when it gets to that meeting later on this month. Now, of course, there's a lot of data that's going to come in between now and then, namely the inflation report from the Consumer Price Index that could continue to sway on whether or not they want to raise interest rates further. But to your point, this is a very interesting situation where the Fed has been raising interest rates for the point and purpose of deliberately slowing this economy. So if we take a look at the unemployment rate, for example, ticking up from 3.5% to 3.8%, does the Federal Reserve say, OK, well, then maybe that bite is a little bit more substantial than we thought, we can pull back here? Or if you're looking at this report and saying, well, maybe the rise in the unemployment rate is because of the labor force participation increasing, because the labor force actually expanded, which is a good reason. Maybe that's just noise. There's a lot of different ways to read this report. But either way, to see that the unemployment rate is below 4%, President Biden erroneously said under 14%. I think what he meant to say was 4%.
Yeah.
That is still largely something that policymakers at the Fed would say, OK, that's certainly a good thing.
How is wage growth keeping up with inflation right now?
Yeah, well, actually, for the first time in over a year, this summer, we did see the wage growth pace for the first time in a while actually higher than the inflation rate, which means that real wages, essentially that the pace of price increases at the store.
That's huge.
That's great news. Again, that hasn't been the case in the beginning part of this year or in the latter part of last year. So that's also encouraging signs for both the White House and also for the Federal Reserve as well.